Ladies and gentlemen, welcome again to the interpretation, and this time we are with sports, entertainment, arts and music, generally interpreting in the media. Let's look at the materials together, but I'm so excited about being in media. That was my almost 25 years of background being in media. I also have definitely friends from law or legal medicine world who have been doing the interpretation time to time, but this is so much my life, and I hope to be able to give you some of the insight of what's happening there. Let's look at the material together. General points we are going to discuss together. Values often collide when members of different media work together in today's complex mix of channels in media, which is no wonder, globalization altogether with media. Traditionalists, I love this sentence, are found working with TVs and radios or telecommunicated devices like Polycom, conference video telephone, and Skype or live SNS, social network services. We also use for education purposes sometimes, all this media. Each generation has different approach, though, to interpretation craft with different perceptions of authority and different views on what is important for their job as interpreter or in general. Well, in order to learn the interpretation experience and knowledge in the media, we have different case studies, different material, which is very helpful for you. You can definitely look at there. Here, I'm going to talk about certain cases, what's happening and how it's happening in media. For example, what do you need other than the always mentioned skills and knowledge and reading and being trained and mastering? What was it? You must have remembered already. You must have memorized it. Mastering the second language, the source language, but also the target language equally, being perfect, as if nothing is required but that from you. Yes, here you need something more. Interpreting live for television requires special skills on top of this. Namely, even greater rapidity than formal conference interpretation, as well as constraints or delivery. What do we mean by that? Like certain delivery skills, pleasantly lively voice, and regular rhythm, good diction, articulation, enunciation, elocution, pronunciation, whatever you call it, whatever a good speaker for the microphone needs. I hope to be having some of them. Examples will be taken primarily from the coverage and from the new channels. You can look at different channels. And let's look at some examples here. In the usual international conference situation, generally what happens there, certain standard languages are used. The main ones, specifically in the Europe area, French, English, Spanish, Russian, Arabic, even Chinese, for conferences in the United Nations or family of organizations. In the European circuit, when we look at just in Europe, the main languages are English and the language of the country where the conference is being held. Apparently, like sometimes it's in Switzerland or Germany or France, then that language. Or sometimes 3 or 4 languages such as English, French, German, Spanish, all together. For example, some institutions or some meetings or conferences we can mention here. European Economic Community, EEC related conferences is one of them. Italian, they also use sometimes. Or European Economic Community and the European Parliament actually have interpretation, albeit not at all meetings using French, English, German, Italian, Spanish, Dutch, Danish, Greek, Portuguese, and even sometimes Gaelic. Oh God, I have to think about the Tower of Babel, where the gods have changed the languages so that we can't understand each other. Would it be not easier when we talked all the same language like Esperanto? No, you couldn't have a career and make money then. Okay, on television, non-conference languages are often required. What does it mean, non-conference languages? Because of topical events in the news. So it's not the higher gentlemen and ladies languages. On the contrary, what's happening in the streets of the real world. This means that requests come in For languages such as Serbo-Croatian, Latvian, Polish, Turkish, Thai, Tagalog, Farsi or Persian or any other language, Hebrew, sometimes even Yiddish, you never know. As there are virtually no professional conference interpreters trained for these exotic languages, let alone for live simultaneous interpretation on TV. This is a real headache, our sources are saying here. Actually not. Is beautiful, I think. The source can give an examples from that country in different language. I mean, I'm so happy that we have so many languages and there are so many skilled interpreters the more we have languages. For example, let's give an example here from the channel Arte, the Franco-German channel. My mom watches a lot actually, which has been broadcasting an ordinary microwave TV link. Microwave. So they're using microwave not for actually cooking but showing some view or broadcasting. For about a year they're doing this. This channel, located symbolically in Strasbourg, it's an Alsace city, Elsass or Alsacien, because German, Franco-German city, by virtue of its very nature and purpose, translates everything from French into German, German into French, because a Franco-German city being. There are 3 staff members, staff interpreters, and a host of freelance interpreters working on a regular basis. Can you imagine having a regular job as a translator? It's possible in media. Most of whom come from Strasbourg or neighboring Germany, but many of whom come from Paris and elsewhere. As far as live interpretation is concerned, they have a weekly program, it's just an example. Transit, Friday evening prime time for 55 minutes, always uses interpretation. A team of 4 to 6 interpreters handle the interpretation from French into German and vice versa. Added to that, there are evenings devoted to special themes, topics, some of which also with interpretation. I'm hearing that there are 600 interpreters per day, per year actually, for freelance interpreters because they are sitting in different rooms. So you can be definitely hired for that institution. Then you don't even have time for look for another job. Can you imagine that luxury? It's beautiful. Happens to some people. There are people like you or me. All interpreters work into their mother tongue. So their target language is actually their mother tongue. What we call our A language, basically, the language we were born with. And bilinguals are chosen to interpret into what is deemed to be their better language as regarded voice, diction, and general delivery. What do we mean by that? You could be like, imagine you are a Korean, but you're born in Canada, and Korean is your mother language, but you also learn from the childhood on, if you're in British Canada or English Canada, English. So what are you going to do now? Imagine you're like exactly the samely well in both languages, but still one is always a little better. If it's because of your mother Korean, then your language A is considered Korean. Okay, so there are 4 interpreter booths installed in the Arte studios in Strasbourg, it says in this example, and mobile booths are added from time to time when necessary. From an interpreter's vantage point, Arte has everything going for it. I like this idiom. Don't translate it to any other language as it is. It doesn't make sense otherwise. There is an in-house interpreter in charge of interpretation, which means the actually professionally full-time employed house interpreter. A most unusual feature, equipment and technical facilities, not to mention pay scales, are based on German standards. 30 years and more of interpretation on French TV seems to have played a positive, groundbreaking role. So that's one of the, why we give that as an example, because this is really one of the very unique examples, how in the media, the televising with interpreting in the same time has started. This is just a unique example, that's why, but you can find many other examples as well. Recently, a new venture has begun, Euronews. You might feel or hear or say and see a European cable news TV station along the lines of CNN, located in Lyon in France. This channel has interpretation into English, German, Spanish, French, and intends to add an Arabic and a few other languages. Wow. So it's too new for us to be able to give some comprehensive report because it's a new example, but we can only mention that Spanish elections were covered, for example, the interpretation from Spanish into French, English, German, and Italian. As you know, the Arab League is happening. Elections are happening. In European Union, leaders are changing. Merkel is looking right and sees first Sarkozy and then looks left and then looks right again. No, there's Mr. Holland staying there. So many things are changing that we really need to be multicultural, lingual in the same time in this world. So you can be really using your skills in this all over changing world and too fast changing world. As you can see, TV interpretation is not a minor phenomenon in France and seems to not only be here to stay, but on the up and up, says this source. And that source I am reading you as an example finishes that page with a very nice saying. Pourvu que ça dure. Pourvu que ça dure, it means like, let's hope it stays that way. Let's hope you stay there. The more we have modules for you. Pourvu que ça dure. Dure comes from duration. But again, you cannot exactly translate it. It means just, let's hear. We can also use it in a different way, but let's hope that it stays as it is, basically what that means. Each interpreter prepares his or her own equipment and necessary item checklist according to the knowledge of language, for sure, experience of previous interpretations, because the more you're experienced, the more you will have your own way of doing things rather than following examples or books or teachings. But here are some must-have tips and checklists for every interpretation in the world. Media interpreting is separately, specifically, a different sort of world as its nature is different. For example, tips. Soundproof booths must be available for interpreters. Earphone requirements for interpreters are not the same as for other professions such as singers or journalists or mine, like here. Interpreters should never hear their own voice in the headset. That's exactly the opposite in my case, because I have to hear my voice to make sure that it's being recorded, whereas in an interpretation, not at all, because you have to hear the other voice to be able to interpret it. And there must be volume control for the interpreters. There should be one microphone per interpreter, and you have to make sure that you can switch the mic on and off if you have to cough or whatever. The interpreters should be able to hear all the speakers. All the speakers. Interpreters should have full view of the set and everyone on it, directly or with monitors. Sometimes you can see the set as it is, sometimes you have the monitors, but so you have to know what's going on in there. If monitors are used, there should be 2 in the booth. The reason: 1, focused constantly on the person being interviewed, like on a TV set, and 1 giving the image being broadcast. Test the equipment in live conditions before the program starts. Why there are 2 things here, 2 different views, 2 different monitors, we're going to mention again towards the end of this section. There should be a direct connection from interpreters to technicians throughout the program, because you will be working together with them, because all about is not only, okay, you're knowledgeable, you know everything, you did the booth and everything, but technology, ladies and gentlemen, you cannot control. And there must be technicians as cautious and focused as the interpreters are in the team. So we kind of talk about the essential do's and don'ts of interpreting. Let's look at there. Now you will understand, because of these two monitors issue as well, more clearly with these examples. Visibility. Ideally, interpreters should be able to see the set and all the people on it. If this is not possible for technical reasons, interpreters must be provided with two large-size color TV monitors, one showing what the viewers are seeing at home, exactly the same picture like the people are watching on their own television, and one showing the rest of the set. Why? This is necessary if only to know when the foreign guest is on the set and when he or she has left. Sometimes there are things you should see out of the cadrage, we say, like the actual vision frame, what the viewers are actually seeing, to be able to really get whether that person you will be interpreting is in the scene, approaching the scene, leaving the scene, in order for you to be prepared for what's going to happen. Okay, let's look at two. If more than one interpreter's booth is being used, there must be visibility between the booths so that interpreters can communicate with each other by sign language. You know, you have to master the sign language no matter what, at least to be communicating, like the divers scuba diving in the sea. As you know, they have certain movements because they can't hear themselves. I'm dying, I have no oxygen, has certain, I don't know it, but certain gestures. So you have to also have together build a communicative sign language with those partners. And also be aware of any difficult situation or event taking place in the colleague's booth, because you are a team, so one of the team member has kind of encountered a difficulty, the other one has to be aware of it. That's for the visibility. Let's look at the sound. So what is required for a perfect interpretation in media? Earphones, mine is good here, must be lightweight and provide sound in both ears equally, but they must be mono and not stereo headphones, and never have thick padding on them. Why? Here's again, $1 million question. Please call 1-800, and when you get the right answer, you get this whole thing of, like with a promotion. Well, no, because when you think about the sound, when you have thick padding or the stereo sound, it can change the timing of the sound which you hear. It can mislead you, the thick padding or divided sound. The more you actually hear the sound as in the real world, like somebody speaks, you don't hear stereo, you hear mono. The more the real you hear the voice, the easier you can take the action and translate rather than being distracted by the technology. That's why. Under no circumstances, that's definitely clear, should interpreters ever hear their own voice in their earphones. That would be a disaster, because you have to listen. Imagine you are let's say a Japanese speaker, and you have to listen to English and translate in the Japanese. Instead of hearing English, you hear your own Japanese. I think no intelligence of the world can figure it out, how to do and what to do in that situation. So most interpreters prefer the certain name here, brand name, but probably it's going to change every second day. So I don't want to mention that, because there are certain gadgets, certain devices, certain companies who are providing the most advanced and sophisticated technology that can change from time to time. In your reading you might find some names, but even maybe when you're reading it, somebody is building a new one. So always keep up with the media, what's going on in that sector. Number 2, each interpreter must have his or her own volume control switch. It's impossible to work correctly without this. Interpreters should also be able to control tone settings for their own headsets. So always sound check, sound check, sound check. You remember? Proofreading, 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 editing, and rechecking. Same here with sound, because this is exactly the same accuracy you need. Number 3, the interpreter's booth must not be live, which means it should be possible to switch off all mics so that interpreters may communicate with each other, if necessary, without being heard by the people on the set, or even worse, by the TV audience. Do you remember, ladies and gentlemen, it's not only for the interpreters not to be heard in certain moments of talking off the actual copy if necessary. So there are lots of embarrassment stories. YouTube is full of them. Even not between the interpreters only, between the ministers. Obama, microphone stays open and he suddenly turns to the next one and makes a commentary, President Obama, about somebody, or somebody like Frau Merkel says something, can you imagine, about a counterpart, he or she, whoever, doesn't want to be heard. There will be some, private and confidential sometimes wording between the leaders. They are humans too, and they have their opinions, and not every opinion coming out of the mouth is for public. So same with you. I mean, you will be equally embarrassed as President Obama or anybody else who has the reputable or responsibility in the world if you are heard saying things nobody should hear but your friend or your technical supporter there. So pay attention, please, because the media is full of embarrassment stories about it, specifically in the live shows. Okay, and number 4 is interpreters must be able to contact technicians, what was I saying, at all times via an interphone system which does not interfere with the broadcast. It happens. I mean, we are humans, but more cautious. Every single caution is a bit more accurate so that you have a bit of a nice thinking about it and don't be embarrassed or afraid of being heard inappropriately. There should be a cough button. I don't have it here. A cough button so that the interpreters do not need to switch off their mics, which causes a break in the sound heard by the viewers or the guests. Did you understand the tiny difference here between just off button and the cough button? I wish I had something here. I'm not coughing, thank God, but can you imagine that? Like, there is always when the microphone is open, even if you're not a sound technician, the viewers and you, there is always a behind voice going on. After each microphone or behind each microphone, there's a sound. Even now, even if I'm not talking, there's a nice environment sound. Yeah? So when you actually cut it off, it's suddenly like dead silent. And then it's gonna be definitely realized that you put it off and on. But if that little sound button has kind of a different, I'm not a sound technician, but I know how it's, I have been in there, I have been in studios before. So it is such a nice technology that you just say, and then up, nobody realizes that you have coughed. So pay attention to that. Coughing is for humans. Okay, that's why it says sound heard by the viewers of the guest, the break sound. Booths and general amenities. It should always be technically possible to work both ways from one booth, whatever arrangements may have been made. Interpreters being human, thank God somebody has thought about it, because I was talking about robots for modules and modules. Yes, we are humans. May have last-minute health problems, suddenly sickness, or may have run into a terrible traffic jam so that you're not on time. Live show. So booths should be cooperating. That's what it means. The booths should have proper ventilation as well, but this should not cause any problems, such as sound of fan. We had it here. Thank God my bosses and my camera people turned it off. I'm sweating here, but doesn't matter. It's better than having my voice on top of a fan. I'm not sweating, I'm joking, because we cooled it before. But it's important. Sometimes specifically when you interpret for television studios, it's very important that device sound is not your background sound, but just environmental sound, which makes the audience feel that they are there. It shouldn't be just the voice. It's a bit of a whole, bit of a depth, but not air conditioner necessarily. Each interpreter must be provided with a suitable chair. Yes, because even if you don't have health problems, if the chair is bad, you will have by the next interpretation. So it should be really very orthopedic. Fresh water, ladies and gentlemen. Talking about water, you might need that. Fresh water and 1 glass per interpreter should be provided before each program, because you might have a dry mouth. The interpreter's booth should not be accessible to the public. Oh my God, no. Or anyone else except technicians. And also during the broadcast, I love that little warning, and should not be used as storage rooms by TV crews. Can you imagine that? You come into the booth and it's live show, 5 minutes and somebody put a luggage in there, or 2 boxes of books are standing right there. You don't even time to empty out the room. No, it should be really, really taken care of. I hope so much that you experience that as soon as possible. Here we have the testing. Interpreters' earphones and mics, as well as those of guests and anchor persons, must always be tested before the program by the interpreters themselves. Don't leave it to anyone else. And if the guests have not arrived, by technicians seated in the guest's future positions, like a stand-in person, sits there like the guest, and using their earphones. If the guest is the last-minute guest, that somebody else must be sitting in there for you to actually practice. It is always preferable to have a trial run with the actual guests, if only to ascertain that they understand the language, they will be hearing and know how to use the equipment. It's often the first time these people are in contact with a simultaneous interpretation. They are maybe not used to it. When doing a space bridge or duplex transmission, testing is of paramount importance. Very much important. The people on the other end will usually be hooked up by a satellite connection. Now we are really talking technology here, and this must absolutely be checked. I mean, it's not your job, but you should make sure that it's being checked by the people. We just want to make you aware how the system generally works. Inter alia, says my text here. I love that. It means, among the other things, Latina. It is of very big importance, tantamount importance, that the PA systems on the other end do not cover the sound or do not send back the interpreter's own voice, like we talked before, is often the case in these situations. This makes interpretation technically impossible. The other end may be a third world country, can happen, with poor installation and untrained technicians. All this must be checked by your network well in advance, specifically dealing with those countries. So here a nice material talking about pseudo-live or pre-recorded programs. Before the program, it's essential to check that questions and answers have been well synchronized. Well synchronized. If there are inserted visual sequences like films, clips, etc., the technicians must be aware of the fact that the interpretation is finished before it is covered by other soundtrack of the insert. Can you imagine you're still talking and suddenly the music breaks in with a video or with a clip? So timing and synchronization is everything here. It is always important to have a continuity script or log of the program outline. But in cases of pre-recorded programs with insert, this is even more important. So if there is another sound, an audiovisual, let's say, audiovisual department which comes in, or a sequence which comes in up on top of your voice or behind your voice or right after your voice. Sometimes it can happen that you might be even translating that video. So it's very important to know the outline. Credits. That's what we are living for. I mean, that's you should be living for For sure, money too, important. But credits, this is your job. This is your achievement. This is what you lived for, what you read, although you didn't like reading all the procedures about the media coverage. So, by virtue of the Universal Convention of Copyright and the Berne Convention for the Protection of Literary or Artistic Works, interpreters' names must be mentioned in the credits, either flashed on the screen during the actual interpretation or at the end with the other credits. AIIC, this is the organization we very often mention, should also be mentioned as union or professional affiliation if you're a member of it. Of all other persons are always mentioned. And this is the reward for your all hard works, ladies and gentlemen. And there are some extra helpful material I'd like to just remind very quickly before I leave you. A continuity script we talked about, like the outline of the program, and even don't forget the water and glasses. And it's always helpful to know when the guest is coming on the air. A press file containing interviewees' latest books, records, or whatever, even a brief CV of the person. If possible, a few days before the program, you should know this. If this is not available, the guest's impresario, manager, whoever is responsible for him, is usually tags along and would be really happy to give you the information. You can also sometimes manage to see the guest while he's being made up. And that's exactly what we have mentioned, if you have listened, in our legal interpretation in a law court. You're not allowed to talk to the people. You don't have to have any emotional attachment or take any part or anything unless you have to know his or her dialect with the permission of the court. Here it's not like that. Here you should know, again, the dialect, that every concerns what you have, but also have a bit of a knowledge about the person while she or he is being made up. Here it's allowed as long as the manager and the guest and whoever is responsible for the producer probably is aware of it, under their permission and allowance and supervision for sure. A brief discussion with the guests on the set before the program is very useful. You can tell the person all about how interpretation works. For many people, this might be their first contact with you, like somebody like you, and at the same time try and find out what is going to be discussed. It's always good to know. And also, ladies and gentlemen, hear the guest's voice, hear the guest's accent. This is always same in the courtroom, we know, before the show. It's also very useful to have a little talk with the anchorman and woman who is running the show. They sometimes have a written set of questions which the interpreters should get. Then you are prepared. When interpreters are in separate booths, like one per language, it is useful to have a relay button so as to be able to hear what the colleagues are saying as well. It's not spying on them, rather cooperating. Because you might be using the same terminology or a different terminology. God forbid, he is saying doctor, you're saying professor, for example. These things shouldn't happen. Booths should therefore be built of glass, at least have a window looking on the other booths. TV sound technicians do not seem in many cases to be familiar with the notion of two persons working in the same booth into two languages with two headsets and two microphones, so it's useful to explain this to them many times if necessary. There should be a cough button. We didn't forget to mention this. I think that's it. Well, again, do you understand how many things you have to take care of for enjoying your name on the credits? But it's worth. See you next time.